In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, Christ is in our midst. Today we have a saint that we commemorate in the bulletin that you'll see is Hilary of Poitiers, a French region. And Hilary, unlike what we commonly know Hilary to be in today's day and age, is not a woman, it's a man. So Hilary was a hierarch in the time of St. Athanasios, and the reason I bring him up today is because there was a meeting in Milan, Italy, in 355, where St. Hilary was defending St. Athanasios. So the reason I bring this up today is because we celebrate the feast day of St. Athanasios this coming week, and there are several saints who knew St. Athanasios and also tried to assist him. One is St. Syncliti, who I mentioned a few weeks ago, who housed St. Athanasios within her home. She was a monastic woman and ended up becoming a saint, and he considered her a great beacon of virtue and also of prayer. But today we commemorate St. Hilary, who tried to defend St. Athanasios when the charges were coming against him. Now, St. Athanasios has a couple titles that are very unique to him. First, he's considered one of the great doctors in the church, one of the great theologians in the church, and that's why he has the name great associated with his name. Second is that he was given a Latin phrase at the time from the empire, which said that he was contra mundum, Athanasios contra mundum. Now, contra mundum is a Latin phrase for Athanasios against the world. And you might say, why was he given this title, which makes him sound aggressive or makes him sound that he was against everyone? But it was St. Athanasios' life really was about his exiles, about his torments, about the death sentences that were pronounced upon him that he kept escaping and avoiding and writing for the church. But if you think about his life, in the back on the wall of the church, we have the exiles of his life. He had 5 official exiles in his life, but he also had about a half a dozen times that he left so that he wouldn't be killed. So you think about it. In his lifetime, there was about a dozen times that he was ousted either from his religious responsibilities in the church, or that he just left so that he could be spared a death. But he also has another term that is given to him, which is the father of orthodoxy. And that mostly we hear is a Western term that was given to him because he wrote on the incarnation of Christ. So the birth of Christ. He wrote one of the most beautiful, eloquent, and theological treatises on the birth of Christ, and that really was considered the prime work on the incarnation of Christ, and he was given the term Father of Orthodoxy. Now, it doesn't just mean the Orthodox Church, but the Father of truth on the understanding of Christ. But one of the things that we see about St. Athanasios, and the reason I bring this up to you today is because, and a lot of times in our lives, people speak against us. They speak in circles on the outside, and they'll spread rumors or they'll say things about a particular person, and those circles kind of go on the outside and they become larger than life many times, and many times they're not even accurate. St. Athanasios was a victim of something that we are all victims of, which is gossip, slander, false charges against him. And we see that even the magician Arsenius, who was murdered, they said that St. Athanasios murdered him, and that St. Athanasios was using his body parts to use magic on the people. And we see that in the icon on the back of the church. In the left part, you'll see that St. Athanasios is there, and there's also a man's hand in a platter as a reminder of this particular charge that was against him. But then you see St. Athanasios holding the man and bringing light to those charges. Now, as we know, St. Athanasios fought against Arianism, but what the Arians did to St. Athanasios is very traditional as to what happens to us. What they did is they spread rumors about him, and they said that he was not going necessarily against the church. Because if you think about it, the Romans, their big thing, even in the time of Christ, was, what are you doing against the empire, the Roman Empire? So even when Christ was brought up on charges, he's like, do whatever you want to do with them. It doesn't really affect us. And Pilate was trying to say that. I'm washing my hands. I don't find any charges against the empire for Christ. But if you find him guilty, you crucify him and you do it. And then even the Jews in those days were trying to say that Christ was speaking out against the Caesar, and he calls himself the king, and he speaks out against things. And they brought up those charges. Well, it was the same thing with St. Athanasios, that they said that he was against the empire. So why were the death threats against him from the empire? Because the Arians were spreading rumors to say that he was impacting the trade, and he was blocking the roads and the pathways so that people couldn't trade their goods. And he was trying to bring down the empire, trying to bring down the secular part of life. So the Arians were complaining against him and then saying, he's setting himself against you, not just against the Arian clergy, but against the empire. And that's where St. Athanasios, if you read in his history, was so bold. Now, he was a shorter man, but he was so bold that he walked to the path of the emperor, and he grabs his horse, as the story says. He grabs his horse and pulls. Do you imagine that? I mean, take a second to think. You have this bishop who's, smaller stature. They said he was very short, and at the time that even his beard was like a reddish color. And he goes up to the emperor's horse. Now, you figure the emperor probably had this massive stallion horse, and he grabs the reins and pulls the horse, stops the emperor in his tracks, and starts defending himself and saying, this is what's happening. These are what these people are saying. These are the lies. And you know what happened? He was restored. He was restored because he got to explain it himself. And St. Athanasios, in his lifetime, every time he explained himself and he had a one-on-one, things were cleared up. But when others spoke evil against him, their word was taken. He was exiled. There was the death threats against him, the contracts for his assassination. And we see that even in the icon where he's in the boat and he's going across the water. And they said, have you seen Athanasios? Because we are going to kill him when we see him, because that is the decree that came out from Julian. And St. Athanasios is in the boat, and what does he say? He's very close by. He didn't lie, but he also didn't say, this is me. He's very close, and he was very accurate in saying he's very close by. And the ship passes, and then he goes to the other side where he lives in the cemetery where his father was buried. Now, St. Athanasios was brilliant, one of the great saints of the church. And I think many times people are, when we bring up his name, everybody says, you're a priest? And I say, yeah. And where are you a priest at? And I say, I'm a Greek Orthodox priest. Well, what church? And I say, St. Athanasios. And they're like, huh? What? Atahu? They don't, and I say Athanasius. And then they're like, oh, still don't know who he is. And many times in Christianity, people have no idea who St. Athanasios is, but yet he's one of the great fathers of the church, one of the few saints that has the title great in his name. A great writer, a person who suffered in his lifetime, a great teacher, a brilliant mind. He knew Coptic, he knew Greek, he knew the Septuagint and the Old Testament. I mean, he knew just about everything that someone needed to know, and was able to wield that information, not in a condemning way, but in a way that taught people and brought them closer to Christ. But, as with anyone who struggles for the church, he was fought against by not just the outside, but the inside, and the Arian heresy. And when he refused to accept Arian back into the church is when he really experienced problems. When Arian went really against him in a great way. And we see the icon in the back of the church, and there's Christ as a small child there in the center. You can't see it because the cross blocks it. Good job, Yanni. Yanni can see it, so just sit where Yanni's sitting and you'll be able to see it. But there's Christ as a small child, and he's got a tear in his garment all the way down. And St. Peter of Alexandria, the one just to the left of the center, was the one who had the dream about restoring Arian. He said, should I restore him? And he was praying about it and asking. And Christ appears to him in a dream with his garment torn from top to bottom. And he said, Arian is tearing apart the church. Because St. Peter in his dream says, why is your garment torn? And he said, Arian is tearing apart the church. And don't receive him back in. So St. Athanasios did not receive him back as well in that understanding, and suffered greatly in his life, but at the end of his life was restored and became a great teacher, and had the remaining part of his life very peaceful, in direct contrast to the torment that he had for many years of his ministry. But St. Hilary today, I wanted to bring that to your attention because there's not much written that you can easily find about St. Hilary, but it's important to understand that this is one of the saints that knew St. Athanasios, who defended him, and because he defended him, he was beaten. He was brought into the royal headquarters or wherever they brought him in, and they whipped them and they beat them because of the fact that they figured they were trying to manipulate the crowd, and the Arians were strong. And so St. Hilary defends St. Athanasios, and he gets, what does he get for it? He gets flogged. He gets whipped and beaten. But the reason I bring this to you today is it's very important to understand from the life of St. Athanasios how detrimental it is to speak about other people to other people and not to speak to them directly. It's impossible to call back those rumors, the issues that we might develop and create on our own. And I've told this story before, but there's one monk who was speaking poorly about another monk, and he was making up rumors and gossip about him. And then finally he realized that he was wrong, so he goes to the abbot and says, I need to go to confession. And the abbot says, okay, let's sit down, tell me what's wrong. And the monk says to the abbot, I've spread rumors about my brother monk and to everyone, and I want to be forgiven from that. So the abbot says, okay, grab your pillow and come with me. So that the monk grabs his pillow, and the abbot takes him all the way up to the hill, to the top of the hill. And he grabs his pillow and he rips his pillow apart and shakes it out and lets the feathers fly all over the place. And the feathers are flying down in the water, they're on this mountainside, they're behind them, they're all over, there's some still in the air flying around. And he says, if you want to be forgiven of the gossip that you spread about your brother, go collect all the feathers. And he says, I can't. They're in the water, they're already downstream, there's some behind us, there's some still flying in there, I can't get them all. And the abbot said to him, exactly, you cannot get back everything that you said that was negative about your brother. So don't slander, don't gossip against your brother. And we see in the life of St. Athanasius what slander, what gossip, what the lack of understanding from another person, of another person, did to the life of St. Athanasius. And yet, by God's grace, by his love, and by his mercy, St. Athanasius is the patron saint of this church, and we are blessed to have his relics in our midst and to be a great blessing and an inspiration to us, not only to speak the truth, to fight the good fight, as St. Paul says, but also to stand firm in the face of dissenters and those people who would speak against us, and to call it out for what it is, to go face to face with those who may misunderstand, and to speak the truth always about the church, and also to speak about Christ himself. Amen.